So I rise on behalf of the Congress and UPA government to support, in my opinion, this very, very important bill. As the minister rightly said in his speech, it's a watershed legislation. In one word, if this bill could be summed up, if this act can be summed up, I would say it's empowerment. It's empowerment of 1 billion Indians to make them free, to allow them a great deal of autonomy, a great deal of transparency, and more importantly, an access to accountability, which in my opinion has not been there for many, many years in India. So the fundamental value of political science or politics, the reason we're all here today as members of parliament, is to ensure the delivery of justice. Justice is procedural, justice is social in nature. This bill will strengthen the process and the delivery of procedural justice, which often precedes social justice. So this bill is in accord with Article 19 of the Constitution of India, which gives us all the right to free speech, free expression, and as often interpreted by the Supreme Court, it's the right to receive and impart information. So this is going to allow India to be on par with the best global democratic practices, and we'll join a league of 43 countries like the United States, England, even third world countries like South Africa. And as we enter a global arena, somebody spoke about globalization, someone spoke about the internet, telephony. This will actually thrust India into the global arena with much more confidence and better and improved public governance systems. So Max Weber, who is a major theorist of bureaucracy, a lot of people in the left have read, know about the writings and the work of Max Weber. He quoted bureaucracy, and I quote, as a way of organizing the activities of any institution so that it functions efficiently and impersonally for the public good. So in my opinion, the Right to Information Bill 2004 is the most significant example of the UPA government's commitment to administrative and to bureaucratic reforms to ensure that the aims of Max Weber are met, to make sure that the bureaucracy functions efficiently and impersonally. So our late visionary Prime Minister Shri Rajiv Gandhi 2 decades ago had spoken about 15 paise out of 1 rupee reaching the people it's intended to reach. He essentially was talking about the problems, the inefficiencies, perhaps even the failures of the government's delivery mechanism. So finally, I take great pride that under the leadership of Mrs. Gandhi, the chairperson of the National Advisory Council, and Dr. Manmohan Singh, the first time a central government has taken up the initiative to strengthen these reforms, bureaucratic and administrative reforms, and to ensure that what Rajiv ji spoke about 2 decades ago is implemented and the delivery system is made much more accountable. So the finance minister also in his speech, in his budget speech, spoke about the concern about outlays versus outcomes. This is a bill that will help translate those outlays that are debated in Delhi, the billions and billions of dollars, the thousands and thousands of crores, into outcomes. We must keep in mind that India is a country where we spend 40,000 crore rupees per year on poverty alleviation programs, yet we have around 300 million people living below the poverty line. This clearly means there's something wrong with the implementation, this clearly means there's something wrong with the delivery mechanism, and in my opinion, this bill can be a solution for that. So the bill is also a manifestation of the transparent nature of India's current leadership. And to enact such a bold, such an audacious piece of legislation, the government of the day must be confident of its integrity, they must be committed to public service, and in my opinion, that's one of the reasons why India did not see the Freedom of Information Act 2002 through. So after the Freedom of Information Act, the bill was tabled in Parliament in 2000, it went to a select committee for 2 years. In 2002, when the Supreme Court had twice realized and had given a judgment saying that information, the right to receive and impart information, is also a fundamental right, only after the Supreme Court, only after the judiciary intervened, did the NDA see the bill through in December 2002. But after it was signed by the President of India, made into a law, from 2002 to 2004, when they lost power, for 2 full years they did not declare it in the government's official gazette, and hence it remained an act or a law only on paper. Itself was a victim of the government's, the bureaucratic red tape. However, the UPA government, upon the insistence of the NAC, the National Advisory Council, chaired by Mrs. Gandhi, has insisted on a definite time frame of 120 days to see this bill through. And more importantly, the difference between the NDA and the UPA, they saw it as freedom of information. So we see it as right to information. We see it as a fundamental right, not as a freedom for people. So there are many benefits that people can utilize this bill for. Of course, the rules based on which the government makes decisions will be made public, from crime rates, food safety, details on benefits like senior citizen grants, to the criteria upon which an applicant's job application was rejected, or even how much money was spent in a particular constituency. Citizens of India will have information available at their fingertips, and that is the key of this bill, empowerment. I also believe it's going to unleash a new era of objectivity, of accuracy into the system, and it won't leave any room for an irresponsible news channel, publication, perhaps even a politician. Anyone who relies on sensational statements with little credibility and substance will find no place in this bill. This will allow us all to be better informed and to take better, more informed decisions. As an indication of this arriving era, even the Supreme Court recently, in a form of an annual report, just like companies do, published statistics pertaining to the number of cases disposed by it, the number of pending cases. So they too want to join the government in this process of making themselves transparent. And a similar analogy to this is, just as shareholders of a public company demand more accountability from their management who they pay, similarly the Indian taxpayer, who is the stakeholder in the Indian government, demands more accountability, demands more transparency from his government. So in 2003 alone, 3.2 million requests were made in the United States from their right to information counterpart. And there's several reports that have proven that the US's right to information counterpart has actually increased productivity in the nation. It's brought down the cost of government, it's brought down the cost of doing business. So similarly in India, what we're enacting today will go a long way in ensuring that the openness, the transparency in our system will bring down implementation costs in India and eventually bring down the cost of government, which will lead to better quality of governance systems. So there are so many fundamental differences between the Freedom of Information Act 2002 and the RTI bill that I think it would be unjust and very unfair to compare them. But to perhaps allay the fears raised by you, sir, in your speech when you initiated the debate about how do we create this commission. Sir, this bill aims to create an independent commission, something similar to the Election Commission. And the Chief Justice will no longer make a decision. The decision to elect the National Information Commissioner will be made by the President of India upon the advice of the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition in the Lok Sabha, and a minister nominated by the Prime Minister of India. This will go a long way in ensuring that it remains bipartisan and clear of any kind of political interference. This
but
will also...
Chief Justice is given. Chief Justice is the person, one of the three members.
Pardon me? So after the amendments...
23rd December 2004.
So after the amendments which you had a concern were not given to you in time, sir. So similarly, this bill aims to hold the officers who are in charge of making information public much more accountable, and also if the information isn't furnished within 30 days, the applicant will not have to pay a single paise to receive the information. So there will also be annual reports tabled in Parliament.
Below the poverty line need not pay.
That has also been included. I am coming to that, sir.
I have mentioned about that.
That is very important.
Sir, he is giving tributes to you, sir.
Sir, I'll tell you about it, sir, don't worry.
Yes.
So I'll represent you on this side. So also annual reports. So also annual reports will be tabled in Parliament as to how much information was received, how many cases are pending, why wasn't information given out, and this will allow MPs to scrutinize it. And by MPs scrutinize it as representatives of the people, the public will get to scrutinize how this information commission is functioning. So the government also is committed to spreading the awareness, to advancing the public's understanding of the bill, because that will lead to true empowerment. So they aim to conduct these educational programs, especially in backward areas. So at the outset, the standing committee report that you mentioned, you are a member of the standing committee. I congratulate yourself, all members of the report. It's a very progressive, lot of progressive suggestions that come out of the report, many of which have even been implemented by the government. So one such issue which another member expressed, which I quote the committee report, which says that subclause C of clause 2 should be amended, I quote, in such a manner as may bring the states and local bodies or authorities under its purview, unquote. So in the amendments, now states, local bodies, along with central public authorities, have been made available to provide information to the public. And by doing this, we are essentially only codifying the citizen's fundamental right to information. So one point I'd like to add over here, the Congress party under Mrs. Gandhi's leadership has taken a very determined stand on this issue, and today the 9 states that have RTI legislation, most of those states have been, the right to information legislation has been enacted under a Congress government. So we in the UPA, we believe in this kind of transparency, we believe in increased devolution, we believe in subsidiarity, as the Panchayati Raj ministry that has been set up recently aims to increase subsidiarity in the country. And more importantly, we believe in redirecting our focus towards the implementation authorities, because this is what will answer Rajivji's concern about 15 paise reaching the public out of 1 rupee and the 85 paise getting lost somewhere along the way. The concern you had about the different acts, what will happen to the State Act and what will happen to the Center Act, I'm sure the Minister will elaborate on that. But who knows, eventually the State Acts could be merged into one. Perhaps they could be one All India Act which covers every department in the country. So this bill is very progressive. It aims to take every department in the country into account. So there are some suggestions I have, though, for the Minister and for the government. Although this bill is very positive in the interest of our democracy, there are some ways to make it even more globally competitive, even more progressive. For one, the preamble. To touch upon the Standing Committee's observation about the preamble, the Standing Committee quoted that the preamble, I quote, does not explain the democratic ideals which the bill seeks to enforce. I wouldn't like to quote the Standing Committee, but they have taken this into consideration. They have ensured in the preamble that it talks about transparency being a fundamental right of the citizenry. It talks about how this will strengthen democracy, and I congratulate the government for that. However, Maharashtra's Right to Information Act is very progressive in this area, because in the Maharashtra Right to Information Act, if I may quote it, the preamble to the act clearly talks about right to information being a fundamental act, a right under Article 19 of the Constitution of India, and I quote, it says, whereas the right to information has been recognized by the Supreme Court as a part of the fundamental right guaranteed to the citizens under Article 19 of the Constitution of India. And if something like this could be added into the preamble, perhaps this would go a long way, that if ever this bill, once it becomes a law and becomes it's given the presidential consent and becomes a law, if it's ever to be debated for a lacunae, the preamble will take precedence as far as interpretation goes, and this will strengthen the bill. So the issue of third parties, that third parties will have to consent before disclosing information. Subclause 1 of the amendments does state, and I quote, that disclosure may be allowed if the public interest in disclosure outweighs in importance any possible harm or injury to the interests of such a third party. So although this has been included, although the interests of the public are kept before those of the third party, still there is a debate within intellectual circles outside of Parliament that is concerned that this third party clause might damage the bill slightly. So I'd like to give you 2 or 3 examples of this. Say in Mumbai, where I come from, we have an activist named Shailesh Gandhi, who regularly uses the Maharashtra Right to Information Act to dig out statistics and information pertaining to the BMC, the local municipal corporation, their lease agreements with several third parties. He regularly uses the Right to Information Act to find out information from the collector and their lease agreements with several parties. Now, if he were to wait for the third party's consent, whether it's in 10 days or how many more days, he'd have to wait for hundreds of third parties to come in and consent to the, and only then would that third party information be available. In a similar example, if a road contract were to be given to a contractor, if we want to really understand the criteria upon which that contract was given to a particular party, the third party clause which will only be allowed if he gives his consent might not expose certain vested interests. So in Canada, for example, the biggest users of right to information, I think 41% of the users of Canada's right to information counterpart are companies. And they regularly use this piece of legislation to expose corruption, to expose how another competitor of theirs got a contract from a government. So the importance is not who's asking the question, whether it's the government, the public, or the media. The importance is the information and the answers we get from the government. So therefore, in my opinion, allowing third-party information to be more readily available will actually deter people and companies from any wrongdoings whatsoever. And as per the experience of the 9 states that already have a right to information legislation, I'm sure we can consult them, but I don't think there have been any cases where third parties have been affected, where there's been a witch hunt against a third party, because there are enough safeguards for individual privacy in these bills. If the government does intend to have this third party clause, it's not to be excluded. I would propose perhaps we create some sort of a mechanism, something like an eminent persons group in each area, who could determine if the public interest is greater or if the damage to the third party is greater. So in terms of penalties, I think the government needs to be congratulated for doing a fantastic job of creating bold and very effective deterrents in place, which will not even allow the process of imposing penalties to be escalated. So by imposing the 250 rupees fine per day on an officer, on a public information officer, central or state, which the minister just spoke about, for every day's delay in information, in my opinion, is a great deterrent. And so the penalty that the central or state information commission will impose on this officer allows the officer, I quote the amendments, allows him a reasonable opportunity of being heard prior to the central state information commissioner imposing any penalty upon him or her. So we are also safeguarding the interests of the public information officer concerned. And Maharashtra information, a right to information, has this 250 rupees clause in it. The standing committee also observed that. And it's acted as a very, very successful deterrent in my state. So after all, you cannot empower the people of India without empowering the Information Commission. The government has taken a very conscious and a very acceptable and welcome decision of empowering the Information Commission by allowing justice to first reside within the commission and then go out into the public realm, whether it's a court, the judicial magistrate, where there are enough innumerable delays that could cause delay. As you said, justice delayed is justice denied. I'm quoting you, sir. Few minutes, I'm just ending.
It's code by Krishna.
So I'm just ending.
It's code by Krishna.
Sir, also the amount of the penalty if an officer is found guilty for persistent default in providing information within the time prescribed, providing incomplete or incorrect information, for refusing to accept an application for information, the fine would be between 2,000 rupees and 25,000 rupees. In my opinion, I'm almost 100% certain that we will never reach a stage where the officer will be charged 25,000 rupees. The 250 rupees deterrent, if we go by Maharashtra's example, will automatically make sure that people disclose information on time. So very few suggestions very quickly. To increase awareness of the right to information bill, as I said, the government is committed to this, conduct educational programs in backward areas. So I have a few examples to give which I think could go a long way in allowing people, especially the poor, to access this. One is, again, I come back to my state's example. So the Maharashtra government has in its civic syllabus for standards 6, 7 and 8 included right to information. It's the first state to include right to information in academics. I think if we could do this in the center, this would actually create a quiet revolution of sorts. It would actually empower students from an early age, and once they're mature enough to understand how to leverage this bill, how to use it optimally, they can use this. Similarly, in my opinion, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry has a very important role to play through Doordarshan, perhaps conducting shows on right to information. I don't see any reason why, if we have an ambassador for polio or for AIDS, the government can't have an ambassador for right to information. Similarly, the Panchayati Raj Ministry, whose entire aim, whose entire objective is to increase devolution, perhaps could work with RTI activists and allow them to proliferate the message and the values of this important legislation. Lastly, when it comes to awareness, I think that it has been provided in this in the amendments, but a website in the form of a FAQ, a frequently asked questions database, which would allow any information that has been disclosed to be made public, that would save the government's time. So if there's any request for information which is similar to the one already received, it would save the government's time in disclosing that information, searching for it and giving it to the public. And my last suggestion to the government is keeping in mind that around 60% of Indians live on less than 100 rupees a day. So I'm very grateful to the government for ensuring that people below the poverty line will have access to information free of cost and will not have to pay one single paise to access any information from the government. This was a concern expressed by you, sir. And we must make sure that the government has said it will be suitably priced, but the government cannot make money out of providing information to providing information to people that rightfully belongs to them. I come back for the last time to Maharashtra, where the cost per application is 10 rupees and information is provided at a rate of 50 paise to 2 rupees per page. It must be cost effective if we want people to truly use this important piece of legislation. And for those that have a concern that the bureaucracy, so I'm just ending. Yes. For those that have a concern that this will lead to more costs for the government, that the officers will be in charge of giving information, they'll spend all the time on disclosing information, searching for that information rather than doing the job they're entitled to do. We must keep in mind the examples of other countries. Once the use of this bill matures, it actually brings down the cost of government. So this is not a cost increase for the government. This is going to reduce the cost to the government, going to reduce implementation costs, and is going to ensure that quality service is given to the people of India. So to sum up, I'd like to quote, I believe it was Woodrow Wilson, who was the former president of the United States, who said, "No matter who we vote for, the government always gets in." Sir, the point I'm making is, we as members of parliament over here today, so we're part of the transitory government. But this bill, this piece of legislation, it has one fundamental objective of holding both the transitory government as well as the permanent government, the politicians as well as the bureaucracy, much more accountable. So I agree with what you said earlier, that we are really debating something as immense as perhaps the Constitution of India, a bill that has the power to completely transform India from an indirect representative democracy to a direct participatory one where people are much more involved in the decision-making process. So it's very shameful, and it hurts me as a young member of parliament, as a first-time MP, not to see the NDA participating in this mammoth and very important piece of legislation, and simply on the excuse that the UPA government is not inviting them to the House, or the UPA government does not want them in the House. They must realize that it's not us who determine whether they should be in the House or not. It's their constituents, their voters who voted for them, and they are the ones who are demanding that they behave like a responsible opposition. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I thank the government. I thank the party, the NAC's chairperson, Mrs. Gandhi, for really piloting this bill very passionately and ensuring that it gets more teeth, and this will ensure that our democracy is strengthened. And I thank the government for allowing me to initiate this on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you.